فإن اتبعت سبيلهم فموفق وإن ابتدعت فما عليك
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, this is the first time I've been invited to visit you brothers here in Manchester, and it's an honour to be here revising this topic together. It being a topic of utmost importance to every single person. It's not just something which is important for the ulama or for the scholars, but it's also important for every single Muslim who gives concern to the ahkam or the Islamic rulings that pertain to his day-to-day life. As you've already covered in the session previously with Ustadh AbdulWahid, that there's not a single statement or action that each and every one of us does, whether it's ibadat, acts of worship, or ma'amalat, acts to do with transactions, or jinayat, crimes, or contracts, or everything you could think of that we do or that we say, there's a hukum shar'i for it. There's a ruling, Islamic legislated ruling for that. And knowing these rulings is essential for every single Muslim so that his actions are in accordance with the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These rulings, they're clarified in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also as well the other types of evidence, which is ijma', the consensus of the Muslims, and al-qiyas, which is a form of analogy, and ijma' and qiyas, they all go back to the Quran and the Sunnah. So the actions that we do, these actions that we do, or these statements that we say, there's either explicit text mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or there are indications and principles by which a scholar of ijtihad is able to deduce rulings, ahkam, that answer the questions that we have for our actions. So when we look at the collection of the ahkam or the Islamic laws, in and of itself, that is what fiqh is, a collection of rulings pertaining to our daily actions, as you would have studied in the previous section. And Usool Al Fiqh, in summary, is the methodology of deducing the rulings from the texts. It's a methodology which the scholars use to actually deduce rulings, and the principles that allow them to deduce these rulings from the evidences. So where one looks at the detailed evidences themselves, which is fiqh, Usool Al Fiqh, it looks at the general evidences. As an example, the Quran is a hujjah, the Sunnah Sahihah is a hujjah. That's an evidence. Underneath the Quran is all of the ayat that point to the specific actions that a person does. This is fiqh. Also as well, when someone says, for example, this is wajib, and they say, for example, because there's an imperative verb or there's an amr, and al-amr yufid al-wujub, this is a principle, it's general. Underneath that principle comes every single amr or every single obligation that is mentioned in Islam that there's textual evidences for, whether it's in the Quran or the Sunnah. So when you look at the difference between fiqh and Usool Al Fiqh, Usool Al Fiqh looks at the general principles and general evidences, where fiqh looks at the specific evidences for the actual actions, where Usool Al Fiqh looks at the general principles that cover those actions. This is in general. With regards to the subject matter of Usool Al Fiqh, then the subject matter of Usool Al Fiqh is all of this that we mentioned, the general evidences, as well as qiyas, is it an evidence, and how is it an evidence, and when is it applied? Looking at, for example, ijma', what is the meaning of ijma'? Consensus of the scholars. of a particular area on a specific qadiyya. Is it a hujjah or not? When is it a hujjah? When isn't it a hujjah? Or when is it an evidence? When isn't it an evidence? This is what Usool Al Fiqh looks at, these general principles. Also, for example, the difference between something which is mandub and something which is an amar, what takes it away from being an obligation to being a recommendation. These are some of the things that the subject of Usool Al Fiqh looks at, i.e. the methodology of deducing rulings from the evidences, and the person who's qualified to deduce those rulings. So, Usool Al Fiqh, in summary, the definition is based upon three pillars, or three, let's say, phrases. The first phrase that Usool Al Fiqh is based upon, was built upon, is the adilla al-ijmaliyah, i.e. what is the evidence in general. What is evidence in general, not in specific, and we clarified what the difference between specific and general is. The second, so it's evidence is in general, not the detailed evidences, but the general evidence. As an example, where you have an ayah where Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ufu bil uqud, or you who believe, fulfill your contracts. Okay, this ayah has a command in it, and the statement that if there's a command it means obligation, that's a general evidence that applies to not just this command but every other command. That's what Usool Al Fiqh looks at, the general evidences. Al-amr yufid al-wujub, as a phrase, for example. So he looks at these general evidences that lots of specific instances can come under, whether it's the obligation of fulfilling your contracts, the obligation of performing your salat, the obligation of giving zakat, the obligation, all these different obligations come under that general principle. Al-amr yufid al-wujub. So anytime you find the command verb in the Quran and there's nothing that indicates otherwise, then you understand that that's an obligation for you. So it's looking at evidences in general, like the Quran. It's an evidence, the Sunnah is an evidence, Sunnah Mutawatir, Sunnah Ahad. It looks at what it is and how it's an evidence. The second rukun, or the part with regards to Usool Al Fiqh that it looks at, is kayfa, or kayfiyat al-istifada, or kayfa yustafid, how a person utilizes that evidence to produce the rulings, or to deduce ahkam. How a person utilizes those general principles to deduce rulings. And this highlights the importance of Usool Al Fiqh. Fiqh, is it important? Yes or no? Fiqh, how important is it? Very important. It's impermissible for a person to proceed with an action or a statement unless he knows the hukm shar'i in that issue. So it's not allowed for a person, for example, as Umar ibn Khattab mentioned, was reported on him, that he said, don't come to a person who doesn't know fiqh of buying and selling, shouldn't come to our marketplace. If you want to sell something on eBay, you have to know the fiqh of buying and selling, before, not afterwards, before you do it, so that you don't so you don't fall into that which is haram, and so you don't buy something which is, or you don't do contracts which are considered invalid, or buy something which is haram, or your contract itself is invalid. So fiqh is important. Usool Al Fiqh is the fundamentals or the methodology of fiqh. Means that it's also very important for a person to have an understanding. So the second part is how the evidences, how the principles are used to deduce the rulings from the evidences. How the principles are used to deduce the rulings from the evidences. And this is where you'll find a person may mention dalil, he may mention an evidence for an issue, but his istidlal is wrong. His istidlal is wrong. The dalil doesn't prove what he says that it proves. And a result. So not everybody, you find loads of different people who say, here's a dalil from the Quran, dalil from the Sunnah, and everybody attributes themselves to the Quran and the Sunnah, but their understanding of that and their istidlal of that is incorrect. That hadith doesn't point to what they're showing. Which is why you find many scholars say that the dalil points to the opposite of what he's using it for. Why? Because his istidlal is weak. So how the principles are used to deduce rulings from the evidences, that's the second point, and that's the sweetness of Usool Al Fiqh. So for example, if you have a statement which is or that what that points to is the principles of, for example, nasikh and mansukh. So you have two hadith and they appear to one gives one rule, one gives another one. So they give two opposing rulings. Okay, which one do you act upon? Which one do you act upon? So for example, the hadith that mentions that if you touch your private parts it breaks your wudu, another hadith mentions that it's only a part of you, meaning it doesn't break your wudu. There's two hadith. One says it breaks your wudu if you touch private parts, one says it doesn't break your wudu if you touch your private parts. What do you do? Which one do you act upon? If you only had one hadith, then you'll only act upon that one. But now you know both of them, which one do you act upon? That comes underneath Usool Al Fiqh. How you use the general principles to deduce rulings from the evidences. Likewise as well, you have two hadith. One says whoever wears his trousers below his ankle then is in the hellfire. And the second one mentions whoever wears it below his ankles out of pride is in the hellfire. So you have two hadith. Does one restrict it or not? That's Usool Al Fiqh. So it's so if a person wants to have, in summary, a correct understanding of the deen, he should have a basic knowledge of Usool Al Fiqh. Because that's the fa'idah or the benefit of Usool Al Fiqh, that it gives them a correct understanding of the religion. The Quran is revealed in the Arabic language, and the words have meanings, command and prohibition, Aam and Khas, Mutlaq and Muqayyid. All of these are terminologies to do with Usool Al Fiqh, and this is what it gives you. So the first one is the Adilla Ijmaliyah. What is Dalil, generally speaking? Not the specific evidence for a set issue, that's fiqh. Second one is how you use these general principles to deduce rulings. And the third pillar, or with regards to the definition of Usool Al Fiqh, is Hal Al Mustafid, the state of the person the Mujtahid. Who is it who's a Mujtahid, who's the one that deduces rulings from the evidences? And who's the Muqallid? And what are the qualifications for a person to make ijtihad? And what are the qualifications, or what are the conditions for him to be able to do that? So it looks at who's the Mufti, what's the qualifications of a Mufti and a Mustafti, or someone that seeks a fatwa, and the person that gives the fatwa. What's the qualifications for doing that? So Usool Al Fiqh, it looks at general evidences, not specific evidences. It looks at how those general evidences, those principles are used to deduce rulings from the evidences, from the Quran and from the Sunnah, and it looks at the person that does those actions. That's what Usool Al Fiqh looks at. And it's based upon the Quran, because we're speaking about the ahkam. We're speaking about rulings, and the rulings of the Sharia are based upon the Quran, the Sunnah, and then Ijma' and Qiyas. Ijma' and Qiyas is, the evidence for it is in the Quran and in the Sunnah. It's also based upon an understanding of the Arabic language as well. So when you read a book in Usool Al Fiqh, you're going to find a chapter that speaks about Aqsam Al-Kalam. You can speak about Al-Amr or Nahi. You can speak about Al-Haqiq and Majaz. So it's going to speak about language, the Arabic language. What's considered? What's the definition of a imperative? What's the definition of Nahi? What's the definition of Majaz? What's the definition of Haqiq and stuff like that? You find this because to understand, you need to understand the Arabic language, because the Arabic language has a Sighat al-Umum and Sighat al-Mutlaq and so on. So this is what, generally speaking, Usool Al Fiqh covers, the importance of it and the definition of Usool Al Fiqh. what we're going to do is look at a few chapters or look at Usool Al Fiqh, which is essential for every single Muslim who's not a mujtahid. Why? Because when it comes to Usool Al Fiqh as a science, then it's something which is fard al-kifaya for a person to learn. i.e. it's a collective obligation, meaning that as long as some Muslims have studied it and are teaching it and are utilising it, then the rest of the Muslims are lifted from the sin of not doing it. So it's not fard al-ayn. So someone might say, okay, what's the benefit of having an introduction to Usool Al Fiqh? And there's aspects of Usool Al Fiqh which are, first of all, everyone should desire to be a student of knowledge anyway. Why? Because of the virtue of seeking knowledge of Islam and of being from the students of knowledge, and the person that spends his days and his night reading Qala Allah wa Qala Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That in itself is a virtue that takes a person to paradise, so everyone should desire. And to do that, you have to study a matan in all of the sciences, as you all know, which is why you're here this weekend, this bank holiday weekend. You could be with your families, you could be going away somewhere, but you've come to Manchester, you're in Manchester, you're in this, so you can study with Sheikh Salim Al-Tawil a matan in a specific science, a book on a specific subject. So that's something which, as long as a person fulfills conditions, he's rewarded this act of ibadah, i.e. he's doing it for Allah, he's not doing it for other than Allah, because every action without ikhlas is batil, as is well known. So the first thing that a person should desire to be a student of knowledge, so that he can get the reward, and actions are by intentions. So to do that, he has to study a matan in all of the sciences. So he has to study a textbook in Tawheed, a textbook in Aqidah, a textbook in Fiqh, and then the sciences which assist him in understanding those sciences are in Hadith, then in Mustalah Hadith, which is the Usul of Hadith, and Usul Al Tafsir, and in Nahu, and in Usul Al Fiqh. And the scholars explain which book a person should study in each of these sciences. But even if he doesn't desire to be a student of knowledge, he's going to face situations where he has to know the answer to. Or he has to ask a person. He has to ask a person of knowledge. Because he's not allowed to act or do anything unless he knows the hukm shari, and he has to ask, okay, who's the person that he asks? One of the biggest problems today, or in aqalliyat, or countries where the Muslims are in a minority, is there aren't that many scholars. Scholars are few. And there are many people that put themselves in a position of teaching and answering questions and giving fatwa. So a person may believe that because he speaks a few Arabic phrases and the like, means that he's a scholar who should be asked, so he asks them. So one of the things that every single Muslim has to know is who is the scholar that he asks, and this is something that this book covers. The book is available as well to purchase. It's been translated in English, but we're going to go through some of the abwab in Arabic, inshallah, if time permits. Okay. So the book is called Al-Qawaid Al-Usuliyya Al-Fiqhiyya Al-Muta'alliqa Bil-Muslim Ghayr Al-Mujtahid. It's a book on principles of usul and al-qawaid, or principles of usul al-fiqh and qawaid al-fiqhiyya, which are related to the Muslim who's not mujtahid, which is, Muslims are two types, either an alim or a jahil. You either know or you don't know. Each one has a responsibility and an obligation. The alim's responsibility is to educate, the jahil's responsibility is to ask so that he can be educated and so he can learn. So a person who's an alim, he's a person that you go to for your a person that's an alim or scholar is a person that you go to with your questions. So this, it says for the Muslim, i.e. the lay person, every single Muslim. The first chapter he mentions is the Fawaid, and the book is by Sheikh Sa'ad al-Shithri, who's from the Kibar Ulama, and he's also is from the Kibar Ulama in the Mamlaka. And the book's been translated, it's available. Usool Al Fiqh for the Muslim who's not mujtahid, and it's available to purchase, I think at £2.50 or outside, or no. He mentions first of all the benefits of the army studying Usool Al Fiqh. The first benefit is, we've mentioned it, علم الأصول علم شرعي يحصل بطلبه مع النية الثواب الذي رتبه الشرع على طلب العلم. The first thing is that you're rewarded for seeking knowledge of Usool Al Fiqh. Why? Because it's a science from the Islamic sciences that a person seeking knowledge gets rewarded for. The second is that it gives a person the ability to deduce rulings from the text. So he goes from being an ami to being a talib al-ilm. Without Usool Al Fiqh, you're unable to at least understand how the scholars deduce the rulings. You need Usool Al Fiqh to be able to do that. The third benefit, ilm al-usul, the knowledge of Usool Al Fiqh, it gives the person the ability to understand the text. I.e., he reads the Quran in Arabic, he understands it. He reads the hadith of the Messenger of Allah pertaining to ahkam, he understands it. Also as well, a knowledge of Usool Al Fiqh, it gives the person, the ordinary Muslim, thiqah in the scholars of ijtihad, because he understands how the mujtahid arrived at his rulings. He can see, for example, the process and the methodology that the mujtahid scholar he uses to deduce and to arrive at the conclusions or the ahkam or the rulings that he comes with. When a person has an issue, a question to do, a question, he's got a question, so he goes to a mufti or he goes to a scholar. And he, even in wording the question, if he understands Usool Al Fiqh, he's able to word the question properly to get the correct ruling. Even in just the wording of the question, that in of itself, you should have some basic knowledge of Usool Al Fiqh and fiqh. Because you're either asking about the hukum of something, or the permissibility of something, the jawaz of something, or you're asking, for example, about a situation that happened already, and you want to know whether it's valid or it's invalid. So just knowing the terminology of Usool Al Fiqh helps you in presenting your situation to a scholar so that you can get the correct answer. Sometimes someone presents a situation and gets an answer, but he doesn't like it. And the problem wasn't the answer, but the question, how he asked the question wasn't the right way to get the answer for his personal situation. So that's also another benefit. A person, when he studies Usool Al Fiqh, he understands how to ask questions to the scholars. The first chapter looks at the principles, or three things. The first one is what we mentioned, that the scholars say that it's not permissible for a person to do an action until he knows the hukum of the action. And the reason for that is so that he doesn't fall into something which is haram. And Ibn Umar ibn Khattab, he mentions a statement, the athar on Amir al-Mu'minin Umar ibn Khattab radhiallahu anhu, he says, لا يبيع في سوقنا إلا من قد تفقه في الدين. That only a person that has fiqh of the deen should buy and sell in the marketplace. To the point that the scholars mention that if you live in a country where there isn't a mufti for you to ask, it becomes an obligation to make hijrah from that country to another country. If you live in a country where there's not a mufti you can ask, then it becomes an obligation to make hijrah. Why? Because you have to know the hukum shari for the things that you're doing. So highlights the importance of the mufti or the mujtahid. However, today, even if you lived in a town where there isn't a mufti, you can do what? Pick up the phone. You can send an email, send a WhatsApp. There's ways in which a person can contact because of social media and that to find the answer or get an answer from a mufti. No. Also, the methodology of deducing Islamic rulings. If a situation occurs or a person finds himself in an instance and he wants to know the hukum of Allah in that situation, then it's either one of two. He's either one of two people. The first one, that he has the ability himself to make ijtihad and to take the evidence from the rulings themselves. In that case, he makes ijtihad. It's not allowed for him to make taqleed. The second, he's unable to make ijtihad in himself. In that case, the only way he can know the hukm shar'i is by asking the ulama. And the evidence for that is the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is well known. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Allah commands to ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. So here there's a command for the person who doesn't have knowledge to ask the people of knowledge. And there's a hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he said, Allah sa'alu إِذْ لَمْ يَعْلَمُوا فَإِنَّمَا شَفَاءَ الْعِي السُّؤَالِ. That if you don't know, then you should ask, because really the knowledge, the cure for ignorance is asking. So a person, he shouldn't be content with being ignorant, he has to ask the people of knowledge. And by doing that, that's the way he's able to know and learn the ahkam al-shari'ah. And the people of knowledge, they visit regularly. Like you have, for example, now, every year here they have, the brothers organise this conference with the scholars that they invite from abroad to teach you your deen, or to teach the mutun ilmiya. So a person may become a student of knowledge at some level. Also, that if you know that you have to ask a person of knowledge, then it's important to understand what are the etiquettes of the person with his teacher or with the Mufti when he's asking him. Also, who should he ask? And issues like this. So the first issue is the adab al-ami ma al-mufti, the etiquettes of the ami with the mufti. There's a number of sifat which an ami should have when he's with the mufti asking him questions. From them is that he has to understand the status of the alim. He has to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has raised their status, and that being the case, then he shouldn't do things like point at him in his face when he's speaking to him like that, or he shouldn't, for example, raise his voice when he's asking him, or shout. He should have certain etiquettes and manners when he's speaking to the alim and the mufti or the mujtahid. Also as well, he shouldn't ask the questions while he's busy, or for example while he's in the middle of doing something, so that it becomes, he's unable to answer properly. Or if he's in a situation where he's with his family or something like that, a person shouldn't stop and ask him questions in that situation. Also as well, it's permissible to ask for the dalil of the fatwa, so that a person's convinced that it's based upon Quran and Sunnah and not necessarily based upon ijtihad. It's permissible to ask for the dalil, i.e. if you ask for a fatwa and it doesn't mention the dalil, you can say, and what you can ask in a manner which is good, and what is the evidence for that is that based upon ayah in the Quran or hadith in the Sunnah? It's permissible to ask for that. Just so the reason for that is so that you understand that it's a ayah or a hadith specifically, or it's ijtihad and qiyas, to understand that. Because it may be the case that even that he mentions the dalil, and that it may be the case that the dalil that he mentions is not based upon something which everybody can understand straight away. I.e., it could be based upon qiyas, it could be based upon ijtihad, it could be based upon masalah al-mursala, it could be based upon different things which are considered hujjah, proofs. It could be based upon ihtiyat. So it may not be something which everybody can understand. However, if it's not something which a person is not allowed to ask for the evidence. With regards to who the person who that should be asked, if a person wants to know the hukm shara' in an issue, then not everybody should be asked, or not anybody should be asked. The person who's asked, he has to be an alim of the adil al-shar'iyya, ijmalan wa tafsilan. I.e., this is mentioned at the end of the books of fiqh, when it mentions the sifat al-mujtahid, or the characteristics or the qualities of the mujtahid. So it has to be a person that has knowledge of the Arabic language, knowledge of the Quran, knowledge of the Sunnah, and knowledge of how to apply the qawaid and the principles, the general principles mentioned, with the evidences. So that's the person that's asked. So from that you know that a person that doesn't know the Arabic language, hasn't studied it, he shouldn't be a person that you ask for fatwa. From that in and of itself you know that he's not a person that's qualified to give fatwa. There's a mas'ala that comes up with regards to relating a fatwa of an alim. Can an ami do that or not? Is it permissible for an ami that's heard a fatwa from a scholar to relate it to somebody else? That's permissible. As for giving a fatwa himself, and he's an ami, he doesn't have knowledge of the Arabic language or the adillat al-ahkam or the evidences, the ayat al-ahkam in the Quran and the ahadith al-ahkam, he hasn't covered them. He doesn't have knowledge of the Usool Al Fiqh and how to use the general principles to deduce the rulings from the ahkam or how it's done, then that person is not a person that should be asked from the beginning. Okay, that being the case, how does an ami know who the scholar is that he should ask? Then the author, he mentions there's that number of ways. He mentions 5 ways. Number 1, he knows him from before of a person of knowledge and adala. And person of knowledge and adala, these 2 things. Knowledge so that and adala mean that he's trustworthy and reliable. Or someone who is also trustworthy and reliable says this person is a person of knowledge that you can take knowledge from, you can ask. That's the second way. Or you find the scholars themselves, they go back to that person. So they, for example, mention that person when they're given fatwa, or they mention that scholar when they're, for example, teaching and the likes. And that also, the scholars that are given tazkiyah to scholars, that's an indication that person is a person of knowledge, that a person can be asked. So these are just some of the ways that a person knows. If a person isn't qualified with ijtihad, then it's not, he doesn't have the right to be asked. There's another issue, which is you ask a question, you get a fatwa, and you act upon it. If a person in a situation he gets a fatwa from a mujtahid, then he acts upon it, and he shouldn't, after acting upon it, go back against it. Unless he finds that there's evidence that contradicts what he's doing. I.e., he should be secure in the knowledge that he did what was an obligation upon him. He had a situation, he didn't know the hukm shari'i, so he asked the person of knowledge, he took that fatwa, he acted upon it. He shouldn't be mutaraddid, doubtful, unless there's evidence that points to the opposite of that. But if, for example, he heard the fatwa and he hasn't acted upon it, he heard the fatwa, he went and he asked, and he doesn't act upon it, he hasn't acted upon it yet, then it's not necessary for him to take it. Meaning that if he acts upon it, then he's convinced that it's the hukum of Allah in that issue. If he's not convinced it's the hukum of Allah in that issue, then he shouldn't act upon it. But if he's convinced that it's the hukum of Allah in that issue, then he should act upon it, which prevents what? Fatwa shopping. A person doesn't go around with the conclusion and then seeking someone to authorize his action, which is what you find people do. They have the conclusion, they want to do something, they just want a stamp of approval from somebody, so they go and they ask. He doesn't give it, they go to somebody else. He doesn't give it, they go to somebody else, and once they've got it, then they say, I've got a fatwa that I'm acting upon from this person. Or when they said, why are you doing that? They said, because that person told me it's permissible. But they already had the inclination we're going to do it, they just needed authorization for their action, so they went fatwa shopping. That's something which isn't permissible to do. There's another mas'ala that comes up. A person asked for a fatwa on an issue, a mujtahid, and he gave him an answer. And then that mufti, his ijtihad, it changes. What does the ami do? Does he act upon the old fatwa, or does he have to act upon the new one? It comes back to the previous chapter. If he's already acted on the old one, then it's permissible for him to continue acting upon it even though the mufti changes his position. As an example that comes up a lot with regards to safar. A person is a traveller and he asked a scholar for his view, and the scholar told him that the time is 4 days. If you're a traveller for 4 days, or more than 4 days and more, then and you know when you're going to be going back home, then you don't combine, you don't shorten. So for example, you came to Manchester on Friday. Your return ticket is the following week Friday, 7 days. You know you're going to be there for 7 days, that's more than 4 days, you don't shorten, you don't combine while you're in Manchester, because it's 4 days or more. So he asked that and he was convinced and he decided that's the correct opinion, so he followed that. Then he finds out that the scholar that he asked, he's changed his opinion to anything that's considered a safar according to the urf of the people, anything that's considered Jannah according to the custom of the people, and that's the Jannah even if it's 7 days or 8 days or 9 days, i.e. there's no set amount of days. That's two of the opinions that are out with regards to travelling. There's no set amount of days. As long as you're considered a traveller, then you can shorten, you can combine. It's not limited by amount of days. So the scholar changed his ijtihad. Okay, you're acting upon the first one, what do? You've already acted upon it, you came to Manchester, you prayed. And then you heard that he's changed, he has the other opinion. It's permissible to continue with the first opinion, even though the scholar himself has changed his opinion, he's got a second opinion. He doesn't have to act upon the new opinion. Why? Because ijtihad la yanqidul ijtihad bil ijtihad. One ijtihad isn't nullified by another ijtihad. One ijtihad isn't nullified by another ijtihad. So in that case, it's permissible to continue with that one. However, if, for example, he hasn't acted upon the first opinion, the first ijtihad, then he acts upon the second one, the new one, instead of the first one, because he hasn't acted upon it in the first place. So it comes down to if you've acted upon it, you were convinced that it was the ijtihad. Okay, another issue which is common, you have an ikhtilaf between, you have two scholars, and they have different opinions on the issue. So you've asked and you've got two opinions on the issue, and they're both different. So in that case, you have to make tarjih between the two. How do you do that? You have to take one opinion over another. If we're talking about a case where the dalil for both, they both present their dalil, and both seems convincing, and that happens. It's a fallacy to believe that, for example, you're the only one following dalil and the other ijtihad doesn't have any dalil. Sometimes the dalil for both of them are strong. So a person in that case, he has to make tarjih. We're speaking about an ammi who's unable to even when the dalil is mentioned, sometimes he's unable to understand it because it's not something which is clear-cut text from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for example. In this case, he makes tarjih based upon what he sees of knowledge and wara' of the Mufti or the mujtahid or the alim that he asked. I.e., he makes tarjih based upon what he sees of knowledge and wara' of that alim, meaning the one that he sees as being the most knowledgeable and the one that has the most wara', which is staying away from that which is permissible out of fear fall into that which could be impermissible. I.e., in some cases, a person stays away from indulgence in dunya, so it doesn't lead to something which is, he stays away from that, even though that part of is not impermissible, but then he stays away from it so that it doesn't fall into something which, so he has wara'. He doesn't waste any of his time, for example, in idleness. So a person, in this case, he goes with the one that has the most knowledge and the one that has the most wara' according to him. The reason that Shaykh gives, لأن أحد القولين خطأ لأن الحق في أحد الأقوال وقد تعارضت عند العام هذه الأقوال فلزمه الأخذ بأرجح القولين بحسب العلم والورع كالمجتهد يلزمه الأخذ بأرجح الدليلين. In this case, he has two scholars. One gives two different opinions. One has to be right, one has to be wrong. So in this case, he looks at the one that has the most knowledge and the one that has the most wara', and he takes that. Similar to a mujtahid that has two dalils, there's two evidences for the issue, and he has to make tarajih upon one of them. Also as well, it's an obligation to follow the legislation of Allah. It's wajib for us. It's wajib to follow the legislation of Allah. And the legislation of Allah in this case isn't known except through the ulama. Al-ulama warathatul anbiya. The scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. I.e. they pass to us and they teach us the deen. So we learn it through them. So in this case, when there's a difference of opinion, it's an obligation for a Muslim to act upon the opinion which he believes is the legislation of Allah. Regardless, and it's regardless of whether the number of muftis that have that opinion are larger than not. It's based upon what you believe between these two to be who has the most knowledge and has the most wara'. The next issue is, who does a Muslim ask when there are a number of muftis? So he has, for example, 3 people he can ask or 4 people he can ask. Who does he ask? Does he go for the eldest? Or does he go for the one with the longest beard? Does he go for the one, for example, that has the smartest shimar? He's got a nice sharp crease here and his clothes. How does he know who to ask? Because something which is also common for new Muslims especially, you think every guy with a big beard and in the front row, he's the person that should be asked. But that's not the situation. Or everyone that's old, he has to be a person that's wise. That's not all the situation. So if you have a number of people of mujtahid to ask, then it's permissible to ask any single one of them and to act upon the fatwa of any single one of them, even if that one is younger than the other. Don't say, okay, I'm going to pick the eldest. Even if you pick the youngest, then that's something which is permissible. Even if you pick the one who is least knowledgeable than the one who is more knowledgeable, that's also permissible in that situation. Why? Because they're all mujtahid. So you have more than one to ask. You can ask the one which is easiest for you to reach, for example. You don't think, okay, I'm not going to ask him because he's a bit younger, or he has less knowledge, so I don't have. No, if he's mujtahid, you can ask him and that's it, for the army. And the evidence for that is, first one is this ayah, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask people knowledge if you don't know. And the person who's a mujtahid, even if he's the lesser of knowledge or lesser of virtue than the other mujtahid, he still comes underneath the ayah. Also as well, just the statement that of making tarjih between the mujtahideen, that in itself needs knowledge. Just to say this one, I'm going to ask him because he's the one that is aswab. He's more likely to have the right answer. That in itself needs knowledge that a person who's a lay person doesn't necessarily have. However, there's another angle at which a person is able to know which one is, i.e. that last evidence which is mentioned, that he's unable to even know which one is more knowledgeable, because that in itself takes knowledge. Also as well, one way, a qarina, an indication that he may know that is the amount of scholars that refer back to that person. So other scholars going back to him, or the sheer number of people that seek rulings from him, that's the indication of that one being the one that should be asked. So that in and of itself isn't a reason not to make tarjih between them. The person will say, okay, I can't make tarjih because I'm not a person of knowledge. Okay, look at the amount of scholars that go back to that person. Like for example, Bin Baz, or Shaykh Uthaymin, or Shaykh Al-Albani, all the scholars. If you look at them, you see how many scholars go back to them for fatwa. Or Shaykh Abdul Muhsin Abad, or the other Mashaykh, all of them. You see how many, that in itself is an indication that he's a person that you should ask. So not being able to make distinction based upon the qualities of the mujtahid, that's answered by the fact that loads of other scholars go back to him as an indication that he's the one that you should ask. Is that understood? I.e., one of the evidences, you got 3 mujtahid. Let me clarify. If you've got 3 scholars in front of you, you can ask. Which one do you ask? You can ask any of them. What's the evidence? The evidence is the ayah, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask people who just don't know. As long as it's considered from the people of knowledge who's mujtahid, then you can ask any of them. Even if there's someone amongst them that's better than one of them, for example, i.e. doesn't stop, or he's younger, you can still ask him. Another evidence which is mentioned is that even if you used to know the principles of tarjih, or you're unable, the army we speak about, not necessarily, the army is unable to make tarjih between them because it's unable to know which one has more knowledge than the other. He's unable to know why, because you have to be a person of knowledge to know the level of the people of knowledge. There's a principle. How can you know? You have to know knowledge to be able to say this person is knowledgeable, because you're given a hukm on him that he's an alim. And how can you do that unless you yourself know knowledge? So if you don't have knowledge, this argument is that you're unable to make tarjih anyway. Okay, there's a reply to that, and you'll find this in Usool Al Fiqh a lot as well. When you study Usool Al Fiqh, what you find is, for example, there's a munaqasha. If they say this and we say that, their argument is this and the reply to the argument is that. You find that a lot. So there's a reply to that. So people that may say, okay, well, you're unable to know anyway. Okay, the answer to that is, you can know if there's by the number of scholars that refer back to that scholar himself. That's an indication that shows that he's the one who you should ask, i.e. you're able to make tarjih. And if you are able to make tarjih, then that's something that you should do. That's something that you should do if you're able to. And it comes down to the ability to do that or not. Okay, there's another mas'ala that comes up. Is it allowed for a Muslim to follow a Mufti or Mujtahid who's mutasahil in giving fatwa? You find some people, they're very easygoing when it comes to giving fatwa. So, well, you have people between three. The mutasahil, or what's the other one? Tashaddid, or mutawassat when it comes to. So some people there very strict, some people there very lax, and some people are in the middle. So when it comes to someone who has mutasahil, he's overly lenient in issuing verdicts, then it's not a person shouldn't go to that person. Why? In getting fatwa. The reason why is because there's a possibility that he didn't do proper research. And if he didn't do proper research in the mas'ala, it means what? That the hukm he's come with isn't the hukm shari. Because when a person asks the Mufti, he's asking for the hukm shari. He's not asking for his own opinion. He's not going to say, give me your opinion in this issue. What do you think? He wants to know what is the hukm shari in this issue. What is the Islamic ruling in this issue? So when he goes to the Mufti to ask him for the hukm shari in this issue, he should be content that he's going to get the hukm shari, i.e. that this is based upon قال Allah wa qala Rasul. It's based upon ijtihad, it's based upon ijma', it's based upon qiyas. So if the rationale behind obliging him to act upon the verdict is gone, then there's no benefit in asking that person. Okay, how's a person mutasahil in giving fatwa? He doesn't do diligent research. Because ijtihad is a person striving and doing making diligent inquiry into the text to acquire at the hukm shari. Which is why you find the scholars say, if you go to someone, you ask him and he's always got an answer. What's wrong with this? And he gives you the answer, gives you the answer, gives you the answer. He doesn't say, come back tomorrow, call me in an hour, let me do some research. You never hear that come out of his tongue. He never says, let me look into the issue. This takes research. Every time he just gives you an answer like that all the time, then that person might be mutasahil when it comes to giving fatwa. That person may be mutasahil into giving fatwa. Because not every some issues take research. For example, the issues which are known in the books of fiqh, they're known in the books of fiqh. We're talking about issues which happen today. Talking about, for example, someone says, you go to say, oh, I was praying and my thawb came up, what's the hukm of my salah? These issues are known. The answer to it's generally straightforward. But we're talking about issues which are contemporary issues that happen to you in your daily life. It might take research, it takes going back, looking into the Quran, looking into the hadith, the message of Allah, look to what the scholars say of those ayat and the like. There's another issue which comes up a lot, which is tatabba' rukhas. It's following the concessions of the scholars. Ibn Hazm says music's permissible. I'm going to take that opinion. This person says ganja or weed doesn't come underneath the ruling of alcohol, I'll take that opinion. Someone says this, someone says, i.e. a person finds all of the rukhas or all of the fatwa which are concessions. that's something which is impermissible. According to ijma' of the scholars, it is prohibited for a Muslim to look for and follow the compromises and concessions of the scholars. And a person that does that, the scholars consider him a fasiq. He's considered a fasiq, i.e. he's considered a sinful person. So it's not always the case that person says, okay, well, the scholar said it's permissible, I got a fatwa for it. Means that that person is doing something which is right. If a person is just following the concessions of the scholars, i.e. instead of following, for example, I go to this scholar because he allows this, and I go to that scholar because he allows that, but that scholar that he asked for the first issue that he permitted, he doesn't permit the second issue that a person is following, but he's going to follow it. He's not going to follow it because he's going to follow concessions of all the different scholars. So what he ends up with is something which doesn't represent one particular scholar or views on any single issue. It's just a number of different views which are all concessions, which one scholar himself would never have all of those views. So how do you end up with all of those views yourself? Also, as well, there's many texts that encourage a person to be cautious when it comes to the deen, i.e. ihtiyat. Having ihtiyat with regards to religion is something which is praiseworthy. From them is the statement, in al-halal bayn wa in al-haram bayn wa baynahuma umur mutashabihat, that the halal is clear and the haram is clear, and in between that are things which are doubtful. How does a person safeguard his deen? By staying away from doubtful matters. The concessions of the scholars, i.e. the rukhas, i.e. a person that follows the rukhas is following what? All of the doubtful matters. So where's his deen? Where's his deen? So a person has to not follow the concessions of all the scholars. Another issue that comes up, following a specific madhhab. I.e. is it an obligation for an army to make taqleed of a specific madhhab? I.e. what does it mean to make taqleed of a madhhab first of all? First of all, it means that he binds himself specifically to all of the rulings of that particular madhhab and doesn't go outside it. He doesn't go outside that madhhab in anything. So even with regards to contemporary issues, it will be based upon making takhrij on the madhhab, i.e. of what the madhhab would say, based upon the usul of the madhhab rather than based upon asking a person of knowledge. So this is something which is impermissible, to follow a madhhab being bound by all the rulings and concessions of that particular madhhab. Okay, so what's the benefit then of scholars coming and explaining or giving durus on books that are based upon a particular madhhab? I.e. for example, a scholar comes, for example, Shaykh Uthaymin has an explanation of Zad al-Mustaqni, which is a book on Hanbali madhhab. You find contemporary scholars explaining books on madhahib. What's the benefit then if you're not bound by a particular madhhab? The benefit is to teach people, and understanding the madhhab helps a person in understanding the Quran and the Sunnah. So it's a wasila, it's not the ghaya, i.e. it's a means to understanding the Quran and Sunnah, and doesn't replace the Quran and Sunnah, i.e. the statement of the Imam, for example, is halal is halal, haram is haram, mustahab is mustahab, that's it, no discussion. So the benefit of the books of madhahib and the statements is like the benefits of the statements of the scholars in understanding the Quran and in understanding the Sunnah and comprehending various fiqh issues. So studying a madhhab is something which is praiseworthy. It's not something which is blameworthy. To study fiqh on a particular madhhab is not blameworthy. But to bind yourself to a particular madhhab in all of its rulings and stuff like that, taqleed al-a'ma, that's something which is impermissible and not allowed. So when it comes to studying fiqh, then if you have a scholar who's teaching it on a particular madhhab, then by all means study, but do not blind follow a particular madhhab. Another important issue that the author mentions is, does a Muslim have to ask for the verdict again in the case that the incident happens again? For example, if a Muslim asked about an issue that happened to him, and he gets a verdict, he acts upon it, and the issue is over. Okay, if that issue happens again, can he act upon the old fatwa that he's given on the same issue, or does he have to ask again? There's a difference. The scholars say if the Muslim has knowledge of the textual evidence or the consensus that the mujtahid based his verdict on, then there's no need to ask the question again. I.e., if when you asked the question he gave you the evidence and it was based upon ijma' or based upon textual evidence, then there's no need to ask again. If however he doesn't know the evidence, or he knows that the verdict comes from ijtihad, then in this case scholars have two opinions. The first opinion is an obligation to ask again because it's possible that the mujtahid changes his ijtihad. The second one is not an obligation to ask again because he already has a previous verdict, so he can continue acting upon that he acted upon, so he can continue acting upon it afterwards. That's the two opinions on that issue. The next chapter comes to Usool Al Fiqh. That was all to do with the Mufti and the Mujtahid. The first one, what are the ahkam al-shari'iyya, and you covered that in the fiqh class. Wajib and mandub and mustahab and makruh and haram and mubah, or the 5 ahkam al-shari'iyya. That was covered in. With regards to the types of wajib, then wajib is of 2 types. The actions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, i.e. the sunnah. When it comes to one of the chapters in the book of Usul Al Fiqh, it's called af'al, or af'al al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when it comes to the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, then it's qawliya wa fi'liya wa taqririya. So the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad is either action statements or actions or things that he approved of sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This chapter, that if there's an action of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then what's the hukum for us with regards to that action? So the actions of the Messenger of Allah are classified into the following categories. Number 1, actions which are specific to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we're not allowed to. It's impermissible to follow him in that, like marrying more than 4 wives. There are actions that are considered fitra or innate, and they're not an act of ibadah. It's not considered an act of ibadah. For example, the example that the author he gives is wearing a turban. Another example that's given, so in this case, wearing a turban. So this type shows the permissibility of the action, but it's not legislated to follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that action, because the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't do it as an act of ibadah. The acts that were done that a person has to eat in and sleep in and drink in, these are acts which everybody has to do. So unless there's a textual evidence, just the action itself, unless there's a textual evidence to say do this or don't do that, if it's just the action of the Messenger of Allah and it relates to things which are innate or things that everybody has to do, then it's not considered an act of ibadah by doing it. It's permissible to do it, but it's not considered an act of ibadah to do it. Then there are actions which are considered acts of worship, and there's evidence that show that it's an act of ibadah, then these acts are sunnah. So as an example, things that a person wears, things that a person eats, these things that everybody has to wear clothes, everybody has to eat. They come down to ada, or they come down to the customs in many cases. Unless there's a specific text speaking about actions, not speaking about specific text. If there's a text, i.e. a qawl, then that's the qawl. But if there's just an action, i.e. the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam ate so and so, there's no command to eat that food, then is it sunnah to eat the same food or not? That's the question. Is it considered an act of ibadah to eat that food or not? That's the question. Do you understand? What would the answer be? Is it an act of ibadah to eat that food? No. It's not an act of ibadah. You can't say I'm worshipping Allah by following the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad in this act, and it's an act which there's no command to eat that food. It's just something that the Messenger of Allah did from the innate actions. Speaking about innate actions, things which are considered ada. So the actions are 3 types. Acts which are specific to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, i.e. marrying more than 4, it's impermissible to follow that. Acts which are from the ada, i.e. from eating and drinking and clothing and stuff like this, then it's an action. Then it's not considered, that's not considered ibadah, then it's not legislated, meaning they're not going to be rewarded for following the Prophet Muhammad in that action. And there's acts which are acts of ibadah, then it's legislated to follow the Prophet Muhammad in those actions. The last one, and I guess this is from the most important, when it comes to a Muslim issuing fatwa. When it comes to a Muslim issuing fatwa, then a person who's not qualified to make ijtihad, because he cannot deduce the verdicts, the ahkam, independently from the text, then it's not permissible for that person to give fatwa himself. Okay, what if he comes across a fatwa from a scholar? In this case, is it allowed for him to pass on that information? Because that's what he's doing. He's a naqil, he's passing on the information, he's not doing it from himself. In this case, it's allowed for him to pass on the verdict of a scholar, but he has to be clear in his words. So he has to say, for example, so and so scholar said the hukum for that thing is permissibility, like that, rather than making out he himself is given it. Because if he's not qualified, then he's not issuing fatwa. He might not understand even the evidence of the scholar, but to pass on the information is permissible. And from the fitna of the time we live in, is as mentioned in the hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Allah doesn't take knowledge by taking it out of the hearts or chest of the people, takes it by the death of the scholars, up until who's left over? Juhal, people that are ignorant. And what do? They appoint themselves as scholars and they give fatwa, and as a result of that they misguide and they themselves are misguided. And something which is important for every single person to read is the books which speak about the issue of fatwa and the conditions of a mufti and the dangers of a person issuing fatwa when he's unqualified. That you find the Sahaba used to run away from stuff like that. The last chapter in the book, it looks at Qawaid al-Fiqhiyya. The book is Al-Qawaid al-Usuliyya al-Fiqhiyya متعلق بالمسلم غير مجتهد. The last chapter looks at Al-Qawaid. What's the difference between a Qaida and Usul? That's something which is important, but it's not covered here. Inshallah, that's a lesson that Abu Abbas and the brothers can give, inshallah, in Qawaid al-Fiqhiyya. What does Qawaid al-Fiqh? Which Qawaid al-Fiqh does a Muslim need to know? The first one, the most important is, and we're going to innamal a'mal binniyat, actions are by intentions, meaning that the intention is what reveals is what is used to distinguish what a person means by their oaths or by their utterances, indirect utterances. For example, if a person says in a text message to the wife, a statement which is indirect, has indirect meaning of talaq. It can have an indirect meaning that she's divorced. Like, for example, what's the indirect statement of divorce? Huh? Yeah, that one's a bit direct. I've had enough of you. I've had enough, or we're finished. We're finished. Okay, we're finished. It may mean, for example, we're finished for the day. That's it. We're finished for the day. We're finished from that job that we're doing. We're finished. It could mean a number of things. Unless there's indication, he says that we're finished. He could mean that we're finished at work, I'm coming home. She gets out, says, my husband just divorced me, said we're finished. She got the wrong understanding because they had an argument in the morning, ages ago, not at the same time. So it's saying we're finished at the evening. Okay, so she goes, oh look, my husband divorced me. She goes to the Mufti. My husband divorced me, said we're finished. He goes back to her and says, what did you mean? What was your intention when you sent that text message? If he said my intention was divorce, that's it, it's divorce. If my intention was that we're finished from work, I'm on my way home now, then that's what it's clarified as. Another example, silly, but the point is indirect references, it comes back down to intention. Oaths a person makes comes back down to his intention. Also as well, the intention, it also reveals what a person, one action from another action. So a person doing an action for ibadah as opposed to doing it for adah. A person is hot outside and he needs to make and he's also junub, but he jumps in the shower with the intention of cooling down, not with the intention of ghusl min janaba. Then he has to have another shower for ghusl min janaba. Why? Because his intention was to cool down, and ghusl min janaba is an act of ibadah. He has to have the intention for raf al hadath al akbar. So intentions distinguish one action from another, actions of adah from actions of ibadah. So the most important principle that a person knows, innamal a'mal binniyat, al-umur bi-maqasidaha, that actions are by their intentions. So with that, a person's able to make his actions for Allah and have ikhlas in his actions. Also as well, with regards to permissible actions like eating and sleeping, are you rewarded for eating? No. Are you rewarded for sleeping? No. It's an action that you have to do. But if you do it with the intention to be strong for ibadah, it becomes an act of ibadah that a person does. So actions that are generally permissible with the intent to strengthen oneself for worship, it can become an act of ibadah. Also as well, there's another qaida which is important, that there's no, if it's an issue of ijtihad, this is very important, and we'll end with that inshallah, because you've been sitting a long time, and if there's an issue of ijtihad that the scholar has, then it's not allowed for you to make wala and bara upon that issue. You can't rebuke another Muslim if it's an issue of ijtihad that you're discussing. It's not an issue of a text qat'i, that it's an issue of ijtihad. In issues of ijtihad, then there's no rebuke for the person, of furu'. So when a person has an action in the religion that is based on a valid ijtihad, then it's impermissible for anybody, or a person shouldn't level any accusations or criticize him for it. A person shouldn't criticize him for it if it's based upon valid ijtihad. And inshallah, with that we've covered most of the book, which is available to buy at the front of the shop. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in.
هذا اعتقاد الشافعي ومالك وأبي حنيفة ثم أحمد ينقل فإن اتبعت سبيلهم فموفق وإن ابتدعت فما عليك معول